Good morning, everyone. Just to ensure everyone can hear me, can you give me like a thumbs up or put something in the chat? I just want to make sure everyone can hear me this morning. Perfect. Okay, I see a few thumbs ups. Well, thank you for joining us for our monthly ECAP recap webinar. My name is Shanna Weber, and I am an environmental education specialist with the Environmental Assistance Branch in the Kentucky Department for Environmental Protection. We are excited that you were able to join us this morning as we learn a little bit more about Kentucky's basin coordinators and their role in protecting Kentucky's water. Now, before I hand the presentation over to our guest speaker today, and we dive into today's topics, I do want to do a little bit of webinar housekeeping, and then just give you a short idea of what ECAP is and how we might be able to help you. So first things first, if you have, let's see if my slide will change. There we go. If you've never used Zoom before and you're here with us and you can hear me, you should be pretty much all set. We will ask that you stay in listen only mode, so you won't have access to your microphone or camera. And if you do have any questions at all throughout the webinar, we just ask that you use the chat feature, and we will try to get to those throughout today's webinar. I do also want to let you know that today's webinar will last about 1 hour. And with that being said, I do want to let you know today's webinar will be recorded, and I will be working to send out the webinar recording as well as the presentation slides within the next few days. Just give me a little bit of time to edit them, and then I will send them to the email that you registered for today's event with. So what is ECAP? ECAP stands for the Environmental Compliance Assistance Program. And if you take anything away from my short spiel today about ECAP, it is that we are genuinely here to help. So the program itself has two main objectives. The first is going to be to help businesses understand and comply with Kentucky's environmental requirements. And then the second is to provide free and confidential assistance to Kentucky's businesses. And we're going to dive a little bit deeper into what that means and what we can do for you. So ECAP acts as Kentucky's Small Business Environmental Assistance Program, or I'm going to refer to it as an SBEP. SBEPs are requirements of the Clean Air Act, so we are primarily funded by facilities' air emission fees. And for that reason, we specialize in providing air quality assistance to small businesses in Kentucky. And a small business is one that is less than 100 employees. They must be independently owned and operated, and they cannot be a major source of air emissions. One of our major duties is providing technical assistance, that free technical assistance that I talked about earlier. As I mentioned in the last slide, we do specialize in small business assistance, and specifically with questions related to air quality. So some of that technical assistance that we can do includes doing site visits. We can do potentially emission calculations, and we can even develop entire air applications for small businesses. And that will include filling out all of the required forms. We can also help develop record keeping and reporting spreadsheets for air permit requirements. So for example, rolling total spreadsheets. Kentucky has actually opted to make our SBEP program multimedia, where other states may just focus on air quality specifically. So we do staff a phone and email hotline to take in requests from the general public and companies. We can provide general assistance in several water and waste topics as well. Generally, we get things like KPDES permits, questions about hazardous waste. Really, we get all sorts of questions. For some areas, for example, solid waste, we can actually act as a referral service to the subject matter experts. So if we don't know the answer to your question, we will forward that question or forward you to somebody who does. So we kind of act as that referral service. We can also help facilities identify if regulations may be relevant, and we can recommend that they review certain regulations to identify the applicability for their operations. So we know these regulations are hard to read and understand sometimes, but we can help with that. And then we can also assist with new economic development projects. So we can help them identify potentially applicable permits. We can help companies new to Kentucky get into meetings with different divisions within our department all at once rather than going through each of them individually. And then last, but certainly not least, ECAP develops educational documents for the public. This can be everything from quick one-page fact sheets on new regulation changes or just regulations in general, to even 80-page compliance documents that cover every potential regulation a facility in a specific sector might need to be concerned with. All of these documents are going to be housed online in our resource library, which I have linked on this slide. So when I send it out, feel free to go to this slide and check out that resource library. We also hold training events and workshops like the one that you are attending today. Along with our ECAP Recap webinar series, we are currently hosting our Air, Water, and Waste 101 series, which is just an introductory level workshop regarding air, water, and waste regulations and how to stay compliant. And although not as common, we can also do meetings with individual companies for specific trainings or assistance as well. So far I have talked about what ECAP can do, but I do think it is important to note what we cannot do. ECAP does not issue NOVs, even if issues are seen during a site visit. ECAP doesn't make any sort of regulatory determination or give requirements. We do make recommendations to facilities. So we have no regulatory authority. Like I said in the beginning, we really are here to help. We also do not interfere with any inspector activity or anything covered in an inspection report. Our enforcement discretion does not supersede any of that, and I'm going to cover that enforcement discretion in just a second. And then finally, ECAP cannot act solely as a corrective action or a remedial measure following an inspection report or an NOV. We can assist a facility meet requirements, but we cannot be the remedial measure in itself. So I have mentioned a few times now that our services are free and confidential, and we do not report on potential violations outside of a few exceptions. The Department for Environmental Protection did create an enforcement discretion policy for the Environmental Compliance Assistance Program that you can see on the screen. The important part of this discretion is that facilities that work with us are given a reasonable opportunity to correct violations before they are brought to any regulatory agencies. And finally, I like to end my little talk about ECAP by giving some of our accomplishments that our program likes to share. We have an average of 1,100 assistance requests per year, with 115 of those being detailed assistances. 54% of follow-up survey respondents are small businesses. We have a 96% positive rating from our respondents, with 94% saying that they would use ECAP again and recommend it to others. And 87% of our clients make changes based on their recommendations. So we like to share what others think of our program as well. So with that being said, if you have any additional questions about ECAP or the services that we offer, feel free to reach out to me. At the end of our webinar today, I will have on screen our hotline number and email address that I mentioned earlier. This number and email goes directly to our ECAP staff members, and we would love to help you out with any questions that you might have. Now, with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and turn the floor over to our guest speaker today, Mr. Nathan Alexander. Nathan is an environmental scientist within the Kentucky Division of Water and also serves as the Big Sandy Basin Coordinator. Nathan, thank you for joining us today. The floor is all yours.
Thank you, Shanna, and hello, everybody. It's good to be here. Go ahead and share my screen. Okay, I appreciate the opportunity to speak today and get a chance to tell you guys what we do over at the non-point source branch, the watershed management branch here in Kentucky Division of Water. Again, my name is Nathan Alexander, and I'm the Big Sandy Basin Coordinator. The Big Sandy River is located in the far eastern part of the state. So my work primarily involves helping communities out in the Appalachia region deal with flooding and other non-point source pollution. Just a quick rundown of the presentation today. I'm going to go over some basics about the basin coordinator role.
Hey Nathan, I'm sorry to stop you, but we can't see your
Yes.
screen right now.
Oh, how about now?
That's perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, apologies. Uh, So just overview, we're gonna talk about what it means to be basin coordinator, what a watershed is. I know a lot of you that might be old news to some of you, but it's good to start with the basics generally. Talk about non-point source pollution, how we manage that, using what we call the watershed management approach. I'll go over some of our projects, give you guys some tools that you can use to learn about water quality in your area. And then quickly talk about some of the partners that we work with. A couple things before we get started. River basin and watershed are words that I will unintentionally use interchangeably throughout this. They mean the same thing. In the past, I've learned this lesson the hard way that kind of confuses people. But when I say watershed or river basin, we're talking about the same thing. It's also good to point out right off the top that we are part of the non-regulatory division of Division of Water. So we don't have any teeth. Like Shannon was saying with her group, we can't issue any violations. We don't report to violations. So there are some property owners and some communities that get a little hesitant to when Division of Water comes knocking on the door. But we actually only work in areas where we're invited to be there, right? So we joke that we only have carrots, we don't have any sticks. And I also like to point out that the role of a basin coordinator changes a lot from basin to basin because each basin is different, has different concerns, and our job is to meet the needs of the area, not to come in and force certain solutions upon people. So really what we do is there's a wide spectrum. In this image here, this is Brian Stores. He is the Licking River Basin Coordinator. On this particular day, he was asked to come out and help with a mussel survey. So I believe he's digging mussels out of somewhere out of the Licking River, helping Fish and Wildlife do some research. So what we do changes quite a bit from day to day. Starting from a very basic level, what is a watershed? Most people know this, but a watershed is just an area of land from where all of the water drains to a central point. Anywhere you stand on any piece of land, you are actually in a watershed. The USGS has come up with a pretty helpful but somewhat confusing coding system to identify watersheds across the country. It's a digit system that one large watershed with multiple subwatersheds inside of it, kind of like a Russian nesting doll system. As you can see there, as each subwatershed adds 2 digits to the code, and we won't go too long into this, but my basin, the Big Sandy Basin, just for some scale, is what they call a HUC 8, hydrologic unit code 8. What's this? So it's 8 digits, watershed. And then the projects that we talk about that we work on are usually at the HUC 12 scale. So you can see down there at the bottom of the screen, HUC 12s are usually, depending on the size of a county, you can expect between 5 and 8 HUC 12s to be inside a county. And it's not the county lines that dictate that. It's just we're talking general land mass, land area. This map shows the major river basins in Kentucky. Like I said, the Big Sandy is the far eastern part of the state. That's a HUC 8. There are 7 total river basins in the state. Each of them has a basin coordinator like myself. And I've briefly put on here some of the verbiage from our website on what exactly a water coordinator or watershed coordinator does, right? We serve as facilitators for agency activities and as a point of contact for local organizations to address clean water issues. What that means is that we do anything and everything to help mitigate non-point source pollution. Often this looks like stakeholder engagement, coordinating meetings with local organizations, city governments, county governments, to try and address the issues that they have. We do a lot of technical advising, education and outreach for both adults and youth. And then we assist in the watershed planning efforts, which is something I'll talk about a bit more. Non-point source pollution. In these pictures really indicate why we are part of the why our system is non-regulatory, right? So point source pollution is any pollution that comes from a pipe. It's generally relatively easy to identify and relatively easy to regulate. Non-point source pollution is runoff from multiple places. It's kind of just a byproduct of general human habitation. Automobile runoff, farming practices runoff, industrial practices runoff. So I like to think of it as there's not anyone that is particularly to blame for this, and therefore it's kind of everybody's responsibility to help clean it up. And that's what we try and do in our division. This slide I stole from the University of Maryland, and it's just a good visual of some healthy healthy watershed areas versus unhealthy practices. I won't linger on this too long. The watershed planning approach. So this is something that the EPA put together, and it's a practice that we implement here in the state. The idea is to take a holistic approach to watershed planning and water quality in the area. So it's more of a framework that allows, communities and technical advisors like ourselves to really identify individual problems, and we're not stuck using a certain plan. It's a good way to identify causes and sources of impairment. It'll provide strategies to address the most important issues, provide outlines for implementation. It will include responsible entities, partners, schedules, resources needed, and funding option, and requires 319 implementation grant funding. So the document you see on the right there, Kentucky Watershed Planning Guidebook, this is something that we put out in 2010. The idea here is to walk communities through the process of developing a watershed plan. It's a little outdated, but it's still a very good document. And this is available on our website. I've got a link to it at the end of the presentation. So I'd like to talk a little bit about some of our projects. So our main responsibility in the branch is to administer the Clean Water Act Section 319 funding, right? We call these 319 grants as the shorthand. So this is money that the EPA delivers to each state, and each state then administers it to local organizations for clean water projects. Funds can be used for best management practice, education and outreach programs. We can do watershed planning, and then we can do project planning based on the watershed plans. Our grant cycle for the next year is just now starting to kick into gear, with letters of intent are due November 15th, and applications are going to be due February 14th, Valentine's Day of next year. So if any of y'all is part of an organization or an area that might be interested in watershed planning, or if you have an existing watershed plan and you want to do some projects, be thinking about getting those letters of intent in as soon as you can. Now to the more interesting stuff. So this next couple of slides are going to talk about some of the projects that we've been working on with communities. This first one is an agriculture problem. This is based on a watershed plan we have out in LaRue County. Something common we see in agricultural areas is cows migrating into the water, right? They like the water, they drink there, it cools them off. Unfortunately, it produces a lot of nitrogen in the water, which can have adverse effects on aquatic life. What this farmer did, so there was no power out to this field, and so there was no way to get to pump water away from the creek. So we use 319 funding to fund a solar panel and a battery. I think this cost somewhere around $12,000 to power a pump to get water up the hill, which lured the cows away from the creek, and they were able to get water at a different location. So it didn't keep them out completely, right? But it went a long way in helping mitigate some of the nutrient problems they were having in the creek. Flooding is obviously a big concern in eastern part of the state, but really everywhere. And really what's happened here is that human development has just taken over floodplains. We like living near water. We build near water in eastern Kentucky and other hilly areas. Usually the flat buildable level ground is in the floodplain, unfortunately. But the waters don't know that, right? You can see there, the picture on the left is a natural floodplain. The water they're designed to overflow, which is usually not a problem unless we put humans next to it and bad things happen. So the picture down the far left is from Hardy Creek, I think in Oldham County, perhaps. Anyway, you can see some of the flood damage that's eroded that bank. They're actually losing part of the road there. I think there's a lot of farming in the area, tightly packed soil. The floods are coming through there and just kind of acting like a sandblaster and ripping away the bank of that creek. The picture beside it is from Moorhead, and that shows kind of the floods on Moorhead and how that affects all the buildings nearby. And of course, they were affected in the 22 floods. They are working with one of our basin coordinators on this Moorhead Green Sink Trail. So green sinks are retention basins. They're kind of natural green areas. We call them green infrastructure projects that house water, pull it out of the creek for a while. The water will slowly dissipate down in the ground over a span of a couple of weeks. So when there's a big flood, it'll pull out some of that water from the creek and help mitigate the problem. The one you see down in the bottom right, that is on Banklick Creek in northern Kentucky. And then the image above that is kind of our plan for the Moorhead Green Sink Trail. I think there's funding for the two bottom left basins, with the rest of it hopefully to be filled in over the next 10 years or so. Low-head dams, so these don't really affect water quality, but they are very dangerous, and it's become a big project of ours to try and get as many of these out of our rivers as we can. I live in Georgetown, very close to the Great Crossing. There's a Elkhorn Creek, Great Crossing area has a low-head dam that's responsible for 2 deaths over the last 15 years or so. We're working on removing one in Pike County that has, fortunately, there hasn't been any deaths, but there have been, I think, 7 or 8 emergency rescues from there over the last 18 months or so. So these dams are very dangerous, and we've connected with a group out of Colorado, I want to say, that is retrofitting these dams and turning them into recreational facilities. So the pictures you see there of the man surfing, I think he's surfing. That used to be the Lowhead Dam there on the left. And so it still retains its ability to hold water back. A lot of these are areas where they're pulling water for water treatment centers. So it still serves the purpose. It's just no longer dangerous. So there are multiple communities across the state who are looking at taking these dams out and ideally putting in these recreational facilities. Tires is also another big project that we deal with, particularly out in my area in the Big Sandy. Decades and decades of illegal dumping have the amount of tires out there is kind of mind-blowing. Estimates of half million maybe in the Tug Fork River and its tributaries. And you can see that the picture with them buried, you can see why it's such a struggle, right? So getting tires out, there's 2 challenges that come along with getting tires out. One is just physically demanding work, and that often requires heavy equipment. And 2, it's expensive to get rid of the tires. Once you get them out, what do you do with them? And so we're working with communities to try and solve both of these problems. The picture you see there on the top right, that is a group called Friends of the Tug Fork River. They started as a fishing group. Now they're just a powerhouse of clean water activity along the Tug Fork. And they're working with West Virginia DEP. They've gotten funding through them to help pull out tires and dispose of them. And that machine, they call that a hydro track. And that can actually, it's got pontoons on and treads. So it can get in the water and pull out tires that have been sunken that otherwise, I mean, humans can't get them out on themselves. And then down below that is a big tire cleanup we did in Pikeville with students from the University of Pikeville. I think they brought in 60 or 70 students, and we spent the day pulling tires out. And this is just one area, very small area of the Levi's and Fork River where we're pulling that out. The most useful tool I wanted to point out is our Kentucky Water Health Portal. This is where you go if you're interested in finding out what the water quality is like in your area. Visit the portal. That's a screenshot there on the left. If you find it, we break it down into designated uses. So you can see we have 6 designated uses, and this will tell you whether or not it's safe to do these activities in the water, right? So primary contact recreation, that is anything where your head goes under the water. Secondary contact is just in the water, but your head doesn't go underwater. Aquatic life is a good fishing indicator. Water supply and fish consumption, whether or not you can eat the fish. So if you visit the portal, click on the stream, you'll get some information like you see down there at the bottom. And if it's also possible to get a more detailed assessment. Not every creek in the state has data, but what we have is there. And this is a very good tool for anyone to go in and see what kind of problems they face in their area. A couple of the resources to point out. The EPA has a kind of a nationwide version of the water health portal called How's My Waterway. I would encourage you guys to go there. Also the streamer. This is more of a fun, so the information there, you can click on any stream in the country and it'll tell you the flow and where it goes to. So what you see in that image is I clicked on, I think that's Kentucky River. You can see it also illustrates how watersheds work. One goes into the next. So water from Kentucky River goes into the Ohio, which goes into the Mississippi, and it all eventually makes its way out to the Gulf. And here's just a very short list of our partners. We couldn't do what we do without the help of other organizations and with community groups. So we're working a lot with FEMA and Corps of Engineers on some flooding assistance in Eastern Kentucky. A lot of the buyout properties, we're trying to figure out ways to build green sinks in the buyout properties that resulted from the 22 floods. Same with USDA, they have some easement programs that could also be used for green sinks and to help get some of the floodwaters out of the creeks. I mentioned Friends of the Tug Fork River, KAEE, they help us with educational programs, mostly for youth, but yeah, they're a great partner. And that's about all I have. So happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Nathan. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat just yet, but hopefully we'll get a few.
Great.
Or even if you want to, I think you guys should be able to unmute yourself. So if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask a question, feel free to do that as well. And yes, Carla, I will be sending a recording of the webinar to everyone once the event is over, as well as copies of the slides that were used. Thank you.
I see Marlon has his hand raised.
Yes. Quick question about the tires you said. Do we know approximately where in Kentucky we would normally see like a higher proportion of tires in a different watershed? I would assume Lexington and Louisville probably would be the highest ones because they happen to have the higher some more people, but I would assume they would also have the more resources to dispose of your tire properly. So I was just curious as to where do we see more tires in the water, like would be Eastern Kentucky, Western Kentucky?
So the biggest areas we've seen are along in the Tug Fork River, which is far eastern part of the state, in the Licking River and the Red River. There's an interesting story that we think years ago there may have been some illegal dumping coming from Ohio. Years ago, Ohio had a program where they would charge $4 a tire to recycle tires, and some industrious people went up there and started charging only $2 for tires, and then bringing them down to Kentucky and just dumping them in rivers. So,
Awesome.
yeah. So there's also Eastern Kentucky also faces the problem of not every county has waste disposal, or at least mandatory waste disposal. And yeah, I think it's just years and years, century or not century, but decades and decades of people just kind of rolling them down the hill and out of sight, out of mind, or they're stacked up in the floodplain and the flood comes through and washes them away, and they're just kind of forgotten about. But we have groups in the Red River, in the Licking River, and on the Tug that kind of primarily what they do is pull out tires. The group I mentioned in the Tug so far has pulled out over 14,000 tires, and that's in the past, I think, 5 years.
Okay. Can you go back to that slide again? I'm sorry. If possible.
About the So we have the group, there's a group along the Tug Fork River called Friends of the Tug Fork, and their primary mission is pulling out tires from the river. And over the past 5 years, they've pulled out over 14,000 tires. Now they're getting funds from West Virginia DEP largely. That's helping them dispose of the tires. And West Virginia is the one that has that hydro track, so they can actually get in the river with that piece of equipment, pull out tires. It also helps them pull them up the bank if they need. So yeah, it's a lot. The problem is mind blowing. The images I showed of the group in Pikeville, those kids pulled out, I mean, probably 700 or 800 tires just from that one spot that they stacked up and put to be able to pull out. Unfortunately, it was such a challenge getting them out that only maybe 400 total got pulled out. The rest of them got left there and then pushed downstream the next time the water came up. So it's the logistics of getting it done is so challenging.
All right, last question. I'm sorry. I know you might have said it, but I probably missed it. What do you do with the tires once you get them out? Like, do you just take them to disposal? Do you recycle them, use them for like hanging garden kind of things, or like are they put to a reuse kind of things?
It kind of varies from place to place. So that group in the Tug, West Virginia has what they call a monofill landfill, essentially only tires. So all of the tires in the state of West Virginia go to one location. They call it a long-term storage facility, right? With the intention that they will find means to recycle them in the future. At least that's what they say on their website. Kentucky doesn't have anything like that. We have some private companies that do recycle tires. Unfortunately, it's just expensive. County governments don't have that much money to be able to put towards that. And so there's just a big backlog of them. Some of them end up in landfills, which is far from ideal. Not only is it not environmentally friendly, but it's also a fire hazard. So yeah, we are actively looking for solutions, and there's not currently a great one. To my knowledge, the closest recycling center is in Knoxville, Tennessee, and I'm working with that group in the Tug to help get funding to ship tires down there. But again, it's just a logistical nightmare.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like we have a question in the chat from Darcy. How many acres do you need to own as a private landowner before you should develop a watershed plan in Kentucky?
Hi, Darcy. Good question. I didn't do a very good job of explaining watershed plans. So a watershed plan is specific to a geographical area, and they're usually done at the HUC 12 scale. once they are done and approved by the EPA, they don't belong to any one person. They actually belong to the area. So, and once they're established, they have a list of BMPs or recommendations of actions people should take to improve the area. So if you live in an area, and you're interested in doing some watershed planning, a good thing to do would be, so you can contact us, whatever basin coordinator you live in, and we can help maybe communicate with other groups in the area, or maybe the mayor or county judge executive, and see if one, if there is already a watershed plan in your area, and two, if there's other interest in help supporting getting one going. They're a scientific document, they're a technical document, so they're expensive. Unfortunately, that's the biggest hurdle, is the cost of them. It requires assessment level data to be able to produce one. And that's because if you're going to ask the EPA to give you money to fix these problems, you have to be able to provide a good before and after snapshot of what's going on. So you have to identify the problems, and then on the back end, you have to be able to show that you've done what you promised you would do to correct them. And so the documents are pretty expensive to produce and scientific. I'm looking at the chat now. I see Nick's got a question about the scale of a Huck 12. I'm going to go back a couple of slides. So this isn't the best diagram, but it was the best one I could figure out. So a Huck 12 is generally, so in the Big Sandy, I have about 112 Huck 12s, right? They are, I don't want to say Franklin County probably has 5 that are mostly or all within the county boundaries. I see another question from Carol. Who in DOW do we contact for BMP plans? Hopefully you guys can see my screen. I'm going to jump to our (319) page. If you look up your basin coordinators page, each basin coordinator has their own page. And that should help guide you on who to get in contact with. The regulated facilities, that is not our section. See, that would go to Marwan, maybe.
I'm sorry, I heard
Marwan,
my
you
name
still
being
there?
called. What? I'm sorry.
So we have a question asking on who to contact to deal with regulated facilities.
Oh,
Is that you?
I don't know actually. For Hucks, that is I do not know.
Okay, so for BMPs, what can I ask you what area you're in, Carla? Madison County. So you're in the Kentucky River Basin. Your basin coordinator is named Andrea Dreyer, and she actually works through Kentucky Water Resources Institute. I can get you in contact with her, or if you go to so this is the contact information for Andrea. And this is a map down here of the Kentucky River Basin. And it does not look like Madison County has a watershed plan in place. So I would encourage you to reach out to Andrea and just start a conversation with her, ask her if there's any projects in the area. And and see where that conversation goes, because I'm sure she would love to get something going in that area.
We can take a second and see if there's any other questions.
Okay.
And if you have questions that you can't think of right now, but they come to you later today, we'll have contact information available for you. You can always reach out to ECAP, and we can also help point you in the right direction as well. So if you do have those questions later on, feel free just to reach out to us. Okay, I'm not seeing any more. Let's see. Nathan, thanks for joining us this morning and sharing a little bit more about what you guys do. We really appreciate you, and I know I learned a lot, so thank you.
Thank you.
I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen just for some closing notes. Got to share the right screen. 1 second. Perfect. So we do ask that you do an event survey for us. So a survey will be made available after the webinar in our follow-up email. So when I send that webinar recording as well as the presentations, I'll have a link to a survey. We would love to hear your feedback. We would also love to know if you have any other ideas on topics for future events. So if there's something that you're really interested in, whether it's something a regulation, any specific topic, just let us know and we'll look into that. And then again, as I said, the webinar recording and presentations will be made available to everyone. And then lastly, as I mentioned earlier, we do a lot of education and outreach in the forms of webinars and workshops. So I have a list of some of our upcoming events, which are all listed on our website. We have our Water 101 and Last Waste 101 of the year coming up in Moorhead, Kentucky. And then we're hoping in the new year to have another installment of our Air, Water, Waste 101, where we will also be offering our first ever virtual formats of those. So if you're interested in that, be on the lookout for those. And then our next ECAP recap webinar will be in November, where we go into a little bit more detail on NetDMR. So it's going to be a quick guide to NetDMR. And then our last ECAP recap of the year will be in December, and that is going to go over submitting your annual compliance certifications for any air permits. So that is all I have for you guys today. I do have our contact information on this last slide available. Like I said before, this phone number and email goes directly to our ECAP staff. So if you ever have any questions over anything, feel free to reach out to us and we would be more than happy to help. I want to thank Nathan again for joining us today and thank all of you guys as well. We hope you have a great rest of your day and hopefully we'll see you at one of our events in the future. Thank you.